Okay, so this lecture is on the Hot Wars, and the fall of Saigon. So Hot War is really a reference to the Cold War actually being fought. So after the end of World War II, the world entered into the Cold War. And the Cold War was a conflict between democratic society represented by the United States, and communist societies or dictatorships represented, say, by the former Soviet Union and China. And uh, and so the Cold War was the reality, the knowledge that with nuclear weapons, these two fractions, the United States and the former Soviet Union, can end the world. And so that reality was so complex, but yet so real, that it ended in just a standoff, a cold standoff, where uh, each of the parties were threatening to use nuclear weapons, and thank goodness did not. However, hot wars did break out during this Cold War era. The first hot war being in Korea, the Korean War, and the second being the war in Vietnam. Now, it's called the war in Vietnam, the Vietnam War, but it later will include Cambodia and Laos as well. All right, so again, after World War II, the French lost control of Vietnam, and they wanted to regain control of Vietnam. And the United States supported the French recolonialization of Vietnam because they wanted to stop the spread of communism, right, in that area. And after World War II, Vietnam was also bifurcated between the North and the South. And when the treaty was signed in Geneva, there was a period in which Northerners can go south if they choose, and Southerners can go north if they choose. So Catholics and ethnic Chinese Vietnamese living in the north did go south. There were many Chinese Vietnamese who also were able to go back to China as well. And and the South was supported by the United States, a pro-democratic government under Ngo Dinh Diem. And the North was leadered by Ho Chi Minh, the communist revolutionary who was inspired by Mao Zedong in China. Um, Now, when the French did go in and try to recolonize Vietnam, it wasn't easy because North Vietnam was now fighting back, and they fought back so well and so hard that eventually the French just gave up. And when the French relinquished and gave up, uh, they saw the Americans and the Americans' assistance of the French as just a new invader. And as you will see from readings and notes, the Americans helped the French tremendously in terms of weapons and funds. Now, the turning point, though, of the Vietnam War. Let me step back. Now, the U.S. The U.S. Invasion of Vietnam, like literally going into war and declaring war on Vietnam, was premised on a false attack known as the Tonkin Gulf attack. The Tonkin Gulf attack was this incident in which the U.S. claims that North Vietnam attacked and destroyed two U.S. destroyers, the Madoc and the Turner Joy. And right after the Tonkin Gulf crisis, the President Johnson, went to Congress and for support, and then got support to act aggressively, declare war on Vietnam. However, uh, uh, investigations after about the Tonkin Gulf crisis and the Tonkin Gulf attack reveal that it was most likely an fake. And well, I take that back. Was fake, not most likely, just was pure fake. Because if two U.S. destroyers were attacked and destroyed, they would be in the Tonkin Gulf. But there is no sign of any destroyed um, uh, destroyers, battleships. Many of the critics of the war in Iraq point out that the war in Iraq with George Bush, um, that the war in Iraq and the search for weapons of mass destruction that Saddam Hussein allegedly had and possessed and could use is the same as the Tonkin Gulf attack and that brought us entry into the Vietnam War. Now, the Vietnam War was a hard war, and American forces never seemed to be able to really defeat the Viet Cong or the Vietnamese Communist forces. And one of the one of the turning points of the Vietnam War is known as the Tet Offensive, and the Tet Offensive really is the Vietnamese celebrate Lunar New Year, and this usually is in the end of January to beginning of February, and Tet means Lunar New Year. And it was during this time that that the Viet Cong forces uh, throughout the country destroyed U.S. Camps and U.S. embassies, and so and so and that that success for the Viet Cong really questioned American ability to win this war. That, coupled with the daily barrage of images of war. The Vietnam War was one of the first wars that was publicly um, broadcasted in the news and newspapers. Images of kids that were victims of bombings, images of assassinations, images of Vietnamese monks who protest. All that came to um, all that came to develop into anti-Vietnam War protests in the U.S. And we also have American veterans who fought in Vietnam, were injured in Vietnam, and went back to the United States. And they too started to protest the war because they came to the realization that the war was, one, a lost cause, and two, fought on a false, fake premise, fought on a lie. So Richard Nixon comes in, and when he was running for president, he said he had a way to end the Vietnam War that was good for America and good for the Vietnamese, and that is the doctrine of Vietnamization. The doctrine of Vietnamization, really uh, just required that we would leave Vietnam and South Vietnam would have to fend for itself. Not a great doctrine. And so eventually, the United States did by 1973, the United States did started to plan to leave Vietnam, and by April of 1975, that became final. So the fall of Saigon happened in April 30th of 1975 when all U.S. forces left Vietnam. And when that happened, everyone in South Vietnam that supported the American were in danger. And you also had in danger were the ethnic Chinese Vietnamese um, community. And so with that end of the Vietnam War, many of the first wave of refugees left Vietnam with American personnel and military forces. But that first wave were people that were in the upper elite sector of Vietnamese society, people who had connections with the United States or who had worked for the United States. And when they left, though, things did not get better in the new Vietnam, and many left by boat subsequently, which became the boat people refugee crisis through Southeast Asia. And the U.S. between April 30th, 1975 and 1979 to 1980 would have to start to contend with the refugee crisis, the Vietnamese refugee crisis, and there was pressure among the international community for the U.S. to do something because they held us accountable for that crisis. All right.